Extreme climbing looks peaceful from below. Towering rock faces, pristine mountain air, and the thrill of conquering. But behind the breathtaking ascents lie stories few ever hear about its deadly price. In this video, we're uncovering 6 horrifying climbing deaths, and every one ended the same terrifying way. It was January 28, 2015. The high slopes of the Mont Blanc Massif lay quiet under deep winter silence, the snowpack undisturbed beneath a cloudless dawn. In the shadowed gullies below the Tour Ronde, temperatures hovered just below freezing. This crisp, calm alpine morning would end in tragedy that would shake the mountaineering community. Lucas Tisher, a 29-year-old mechanical engineer from Stuttgart, stood at the base of the Gervasuti couloir, adjusting his ice axes one final time. His reputation for precision extended beyond his weekday job in industrial automation into every aspect of his climbing. Friends described him as methodical and safety-conscious, the type who studied snowpack reports obsessively and refused unnecessary risks. Lucas had spent months preparing for this route. The Gervasuti couloir, a steep ice and snow line on the east face of the Tour Ronde, represented exactly the kind of calculated progression he preferred. His climbing logs showed dozens of training ascents, each one building toward this moment. That morning, he and his longtime partner had left the Torino hut at 4 o'clock a.m., headlamps cutting through pre-dawn darkness. They progressed steadily, reaching the couloir's base by 5:30. As alpine light crept over the range, Lucas noted increased warmth but trusted the forecasted stability reports. By 8 o'clock a.m., they had climbed to roughly 10,000 feet, where fractured seracs loomed ominously above the upper slope. His partner grew uneasy. Surface snow remained firm, but tension cracks and occasional drips marked the ice walls above. During their brief discussion, Lucas acknowledged the risk but believed they remained within the safe window and decided to continue moving. At 8:20 a.m., Lucas was leading the crux pitch below a prominent overhanging ice bulge. His partner belayed from a protected stance 50 feet below, watching his friend's precise movements on the steep ice. Without warning, a deep crack rang out, described later as sounding like dry timber splitting, but sharper. A large chunk of ice from the upper glacier broke off right then and there. The partner watched in horror as Lucas looked up, mid-command, before a wall of compact ice detached. Chunks of ice the size of couches exploded down the slope, crashing like wrecking balls and sending razor-edged shards skittering in every direction. One slab struck Lucas directly, folding him backward before he disappeared beneath the cascade. For several long seconds, the slope became a white blur of violence, limbs, gear, and blood vanishing beneath the chaos. By the time the last chunk thundered to a stop, there was nothing visible where Lucas had stood, only broken crampons and a torn scrap of harness poking from the snow. His partner's screams echoed through the area as he radioed for help. Digging frantically with gloved hands, he uncovered only a section of climbing rope, cleanly severed. The rest of the slope was buried under shattered ice blocks, some 12 feet deep. Rescue helicopters arrived within 90 minutes, but the debris field was too unstable for further searching. For 2 weeks, snowfall concealed all traces. During a warm spell, Lucas's helmet was spotted protruding from a melt-exposed section. His body was recovered the next day, identified by dental records and climbing gear. Lucas's funeral in Innsbruck was quiet and closed casket, attended by close family, longtime climbing partners, and members of the local Alpine Rescue Unit. His ice axe and torn pack were placed beside the urn. The French Alpine Rescue Authority responded by issuing new winter warnings, closing several icefall routes after 9 o'clock a.m. It was May 6, 2015. The red rock spires of Canyonlands shimmered under a merciless sun, the sandstone radiating heat back into the still desert air. By mid-morning, the temperature had climbed past 90 degrees, transforming the island in the Sky District into a furnace. I was supposed to be another solo climbing adventure, but it would end up a cautionary tale about the desert's hidden dangers. Robbie Menddees, a 42-year-old high school science teacher from Flagstaff, Arizona, stood at the base of Devil's Coffin adjusting her small hydration pack one final time. Robbie had logged over 50 desert tower summits during school breaks. Her students knew her as intense and unshakable, while climbing partners called her meticulous and stubborn. Robbie had chosen Devil's Coffin specifically for its solitude. The 200-foot tower featured a tight chimney route rarely climbed due to loose rock and awkward geometry. She'd studied the topographic maps extensively, marking water caches and tracking microclimate patterns in her detailed notebooks. But that morning, mechanical trouble at camp delayed her start until after 10 a.m., hours later than planned, but she decided to proceed anyway. A group of climbers on a nearby wall watched Robbie enter the chimney using classic technique, bracing her back against one wall while pressing her feet against the other. She moved steadily upward, her form textbook perfect as she navigated the narrowing slot. Everything looked routine for the experienced desert climber. By noon, the temperature on the wall exceeded 100 degrees. Cole Hammond, climbing the adjacent formation, noticed Robbie had stopped moving. She was wedged between the narrowing walls, her body turned diagonally, arms trembling visibly from the extreme heat. Hammond shouted across the gully, offering assistance, but Robbie only nodded and attempted to reverse her position. 2 minutes later, disaster struck. Her body convulsed, then stiffened. She was completely stuck, unable to move up or down in the tight chimney. The combination of extreme heat, physical exertion, and her awkward position had triggered heat exhaustion. Over the next 45 minutes, Hammond and his party watched helplessly as Robbie struggled desperately. She tried to free her arms, twisting and straining, but her position only worsened, her helmet tilted sideways, breathing becoming increasingly erratic. Eventually, she slumped slightly, wedged firmly in place by her own body weight. Hammond scrambled for cell signal and called search and rescue. Rangers arrived 3 hours later using ropes and helicopter support, but Robbie was already unresponsive. Her body was carefully extracted after sunset. The medical examiner determined death resulted from a combination of heat stroke and positional asphyxia. Her wedged position had restricted breathing while extreme temperatures overwhelmed her body's cooling systems. Robbie's funeral in Flagstaff drew over 200 attendees to the school gymnasium. Former students spoke about her passion for desert geology and field science. The National Park Service responded by posting warning signs at unmaintained chimney routes throughout canyonlands. They launched a pilot program monitoring ambient rock temperatures and advised solo climbers to avoid narrow features after mid-morning during peak heat months. It was August 17, 2016. The upper ridges of the Weisshorn stood etched against a restless sky, their jagged edges still holding snow from the night before. Below, clouds churned upward, slowly rising toward the summit flanks. What began as a meticulously planned alpine traverse transforms into a split second of devastating natural force. Johan Jansen, a 33-year-old land surveyor from Rotterdam, stood on the knife-edge ridge adjusting his mountaineering pack one final time. His growing obsession with high alpine traverses had consumed his weekends for years, drawn by their isolation and exposure. Friends said he never rushed and was always over-prepared. Johan had spent months training for this traverse between Weisshorn's twin ridges, a route rarely attempted and largely undocumented outside Swiss climbing circles. With him were two longtime friends from Utrecht, both recreational alpinists experienced on snow and mixed rock routes. They had bivouacked the night before just below the summit, planning to complete the traverse at dawn and descend before the predicted afternoon storm cycle. But delays had plagued their morning. A lingering ice patch and false route cost them nearly an hour. By 10:30 a.m., they were just over halfway across the ridge, a narrow spine of unstable rock with severe exposure on both sides. The air had changed, carrying an ominous pressure. At 10:40 a.m., the first thunderclap cracked behind them. Johan was leading across a cluster of sharp granite blocks when disaster struck without warning. A blinding white flash illuminated the ridge as lightning found its target. Johan's body convulsed violently, seizing hard before being thrown backward off the rock. The electrical force tore through his gear, blowing apart one mountaineering boot and leaving a black burn across his jacket. He tumbled 30 feet down onto a snow slope. Motionless, his teammates immediately scrambled down the treacherous terrain. One unclipped and slid across the ice, reaching Johan first. His helmet had split in two from the impact. His face was slack, skin already cooling in the thin mountain air. They began CPR desperately, but found no heartbeat. His pack straps were scorched and his hair carried the faint smell of ozone. Within minutes, both realized their friend was gone. They called for help. A rescue helicopter dispatched from Zermatt arrived within an hour, guided by their radio signal. Paramedics confirmed cardiac arrest caused by direct lightning strike. Johan's body was winched out as storm clouds closed in over the ridge where he died. His cremation took place 3 days later in Zermatt. Parents and siblings flew in from the Netherlands to say goodbye to the surveyor who had found his passion in the high places. Following his will, Johan's ashes were scattered across the Weisshorn slopes at sunrise. The Swiss Alpine Club reviewed the traverse route and added discreet warning signage at both approach points about poor shelter and lightning exposure. Bailout routes were revised, and climbers were advised to avoid the ridge entirely if convective clouds appeared within a 10-kilometer radius. It was October 1st, 2016. The sun dipped low behind the Selkirk Mountains, casting long shadows across the forested slopes. Dry leaves rustled faintly as evening settled over a limestone crag known to climbers as the Bowl. The day had promised nothing but success, clear skies, clean data, and an easy descent, until a single misstep turned it into a tragedy etched into climbing circles for years to come. Ellie Thomasson, a 26-year-old graduate forestry student at Thompson Rivers University, stood at the base of her project route adjusting her harness one final time. Her weekdays were spent measuring plots and mapping regeneration sites for her thesis on post-fire tree density and high-elevation ecosystems. But evenings belonged to climbing. Her partner, Theo Spencer, was a fellow student and her climbing companion of 3 years. The two shared a love for the quiet remoteness of inland British Columbia, where undeveloped crags like the Bowl offered privacy, steep limestone, and long, uninterrupted routes. They'd hiked in that morning for field sampling and decided to cap off the day with a few routes before nightfall. Ellie geared up for an overhanging sport line she had been projecting the month before. The sun had already slipped below the ridge, and shadows filled the alcove as she worked her way up the steep face. Animal prints had been visible in the dust near their packs, large, round, without claw marks. Theo had remarked they were probably fox or lynx tracks. Neither considered the possibility of something larger. They carried no weapons, no bear spray. At approximately 6:40 p.m., Ellie clipped into the second-to-last bolt, her movements fluid and confident on the familiar holds. Theo stood 20 feet below managing the rope when he suddenly heard sharp rustling behind him. Turning, he caught a flash of tan muscle, a cougar, mid-sprint, bounding toward the base of the climb. The predator leapt upward with terrifying agility, claws scraping against limestone as it latched onto Ellie's left leg. She screamed once, high, startled, terrified. Her grip slipped as the animal pulled down with its full weight. She came off the wall and crashed onto rocks below, the cougar landing on top of her. The attack was swift and savage. The cougar launched from the brush like a snapped cable, its forelimbs clamping around her shoulders as its jaws locked onto her neck. She barely had time to scream before the weight of the animal drove her to the ground. Theo dropped the rope and sprinted forward, hurling rocks and shouting, but the cougar was already tearing into her torso with hooked claws, raking through fleece and flesh. He slammed it with a jagged stone the size of a helmet, striking just behind the ear. With a low snarl, it released and vanished into the tree line. Ellie lay unconscious on the limestone, her throat torn open, blood pooling beneath her. Theo applied pressure frantically and called emergency services, but it was already too late. She bled out in less than 5 minutes as he held her. Authorities reached the remote site around 9 p.m., confirming fatal injuries from both the fall and mauling. Wildlife officers later tracked the cougar using scat and prints, discovering it was a severely underweight adult male driven into lower elevations by prolonged drought and prey scarcity. The animal was euthanized 2 days later. Ellie's funeral was held 6 days later in Kamloops, attended by classmates, professors, and members of the local climbing community. Her casket was closed. In the weeks following, provincial wildlife authorities increased patrols around the bowl and temporarily restricted climbing access. Thompson Rivers University issued a formal statement urging safety for student researchers working in remote areas. It was March 22, 2017. Dry morning air drifted through the limestone spires of El Potrero Chico as the sun lit up the canyon walls. A faint breeze stirred the trees below as the towering chimney above loomed silent and untouched. No one had dared it in over a year. A climb that day, carefully prepared and mapped out, would slowly devolve into a deadly entrapment in stone. James McKenna, a 38-year-old general contractor from New Orleans, stood at the base of La Boca del Diablo, adjusting his custom gear rack one final time. He was known in niche climbing forums for his obsessive approach to wide cracks and squeezed chimneys across North America. This trip to northern Mexico had been months in planning, targeting the route's infamous fifth pitch, an 80-foot squeeze chimney so tight that even average-sized climbers struggled to pass through. James had traveled with Roberto Salinas, a Monterrey local and occasional partner, specifically for this challenge. They started early, beginning their climb at 9:00 a.m. James led the first 3 pitches smoothly, though the wide sections taxed him heavily. By pitch 4, his shirt clung to his back, streaked with blood from torn knuckles. His breathing had become labored, but when Roberto suggested switching leads, James declined. He had come for the chimney. At the base of pitch 5, Roberto reminded him of the handful of known incidents involving body entrapment in that section. James only nodded, triple-checking his rack, which included several oversized cams and slings he had sewn himself. The chimney loomed above them, dark and irregular, wide at the base but tapering in strange angles toward the top. About 20 feet into the squeeze, James's shoulders wedged sideways, chest pressed between 2 flaring plates of stone. He got stuck and yelled down to Roberto. He tried desperately to shift, exhale, rotate. Nothing worked. Roberto lowered a sling immediately, but James couldn't lift his arms to reach it. 10 agonizing minutes passed as his partner watched helplessly from below. James's voice gradually faded as the stone compressed his chest, making each breath more difficult than the last. Roberto tried everything from his position below, yelling for help and making an emergency call once he realized James had gone silent. A rescue team arrived 4 hours later, delayed by the rugged terrain and the lack of established trails leading to the base of the formation. It took 2 additional hours and specialized equipment, wedges, air bladders, and a cordless angle grinder, to open the stone wide enough to extract James's body. He had died of compressive asphyxia, crushed by the very rock he had traveled so far to conquer. James was returned to New Orleans, where a small funeral was held. His family buried him with a length of climbing rope, one of his handmade cam slings, and a battered route journal filled with hand-drawn topos. Mexican climbing authorities and local guides collaborated to update the route description. The 5th pitch of La Boca del Diablo was officially marked as high risk, no solo leads, with warnings posted at the base. It was July 19, 2018. Storm clouds gathered over the jagged limestone towers of the Dolomites as the wind shifted cold and sharp through the high passes. Light echoed strangely in the canyons below Cima Ovest, while the valley was already falling into shadow. This summit day for Alisandra Buchcci would end in a split second of forgotten protocol. Alisandra, a 31-year-old trauma nurse from Parma, stood at the 3rd rappel station adjusting her belay device one final time. With 6 years of recreational climbing experience, she preferred long, moderate traditional routes and often climbed with her younger brother Lorenzo on weekends. Colleagues described her as focused and methodical, both at work and on the rock. This climb on the south face of Cima Ovest had been planned during a break between hospital rotations, a 2-day trip to reconnect, away from noise and deadlines. The pair had reached the summit just after midday, completing the route with no difficulties. But weather shifted rapidly as clouds moved in from the northwest and temperatures dropped. Rather than down-climbing the descent ridge, they decided to head down using a known retreat route, a set of fixed anchors that led through steep and overhanging sections of the wall. At the 3rd station, Lorenzo began rigging the next rappel while Alisandra prepared her descent. She was cold, quiet, and efficient as always, feeding the rope through her belay device with practiced movements. The routine was so familiar after years of climbing together. Thread the rope, check the anchor, lean back over the ledge. But then, something unexpected happened. Lorenzo heard the sound first, an unmistakable whip of rope cutting through air. When he turned, she was already falling. He watched in horror as she flipped once, then vanished into the mist below. Her scream echoed briefly through the canyon, then was gone. She had not clipped into the anchor before weighting the rope. Without a backup or tether, her system was never secured to the station. The force of her movement pulled the rope free, and gravity claimed the rest. She fell nearly 200 feet to the gully below. Lorenzo stood frozen, then called out desperately, but there was no answer. He descended cautiously in stages, setting anchors and rappelling down through the wind and rain. It took nearly 40 minutes to reach her through the deteriorating conditions. She lay on her side in a runout, helmet cracked, limbs twisted beneath her. The rope was still threaded through her device, untouched by friction. Alpine rescue personnel reached them by helicopter late that evening after being notified by Lorenzo. They declared her dead at the scene. Her injuries were consistent with high-velocity impact. Her harness, rope, and hardware were all intact. The equipment had functioned perfectly. The failure was human. A small funeral was held in Parma. Her colleagues at the hospital sent wildflowers, and her climbing shoes were placed beneath the altar as a final tribute to the nurse who had found peace in the mountains. The Club Alpino Italiano released a public statement emphasizing the importance of redundancy in descent systems and mandatory anchor checks during rappel transitions. The guidebook for Cima Ovest routes was revised to include highlighted rappel safety protocols. Thanks for watching. Click the video on your screen to uncover some of the most shocking outdoor tragedies ever. See you there.